Hi there. Welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. I'm Doug O'Brien, your host. And on today's episode, I have my friend Jim Brulé. Jim is a transformational storyteller who gathers and shares stories from around the world to inspire spiritual growth and healing. His parents passed along a core mandate for him. Be sure you're always staying in the right amount of trouble. So we're going to hear from him what that's all about as soon as we do this little thing. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Jim Brulé,
Doug,
welcome.
good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you as well. So you're calling from the woods. It looks like. You just see
Yes, just about. I'm on the east side of Syracuse, New York, directly adjacent to the Green Lakes State Park, which has some of the old growth forest left in it.
Nice.
So very much what it looks like at the end of my little 5-minute path.
Cool. Very nice. That's exciting. That's nice to know. So some of the old growth is still there, eh?
Still there. Yep.
What's it like?
It's magical, honestly. There's all kinds of, when you say old growth, you don't mean just the trees. You mean all the species, and the environment there is rich and varied. And so I've been dive bombed by at owls and all sorts of things as I go on my walks. It's wonderful.
Oh, nice. I remember getting dive bombed by an owl once. I thought, what? Because I didn't hear it coming.
No, you don't.
I was like, what? That was fun. That was fun. So I've met you just recently. In fact, we haven't met in person yet. Only
Not yet. No.
Via Zoom. But we will be sharing, proverbially at least, a stage together at the Woodstock Storytelling Festival in October of this year, 2025. And man, it's going to be cool. It's going to be good. There's some badass storytellers.
There's some amazing storytellers. In fact, we've been able to entice one of the premier storytellers from Ireland to come over. So it's got a pretty wide scope, geographically and stylistically and every way.
And hopefully we'll get her on the podcast. Just briefly, can you tell us about her? I don't know her.
Mia Gillen is a storyteller from Cork, a Corkonian, as I've come to understand.
Oh, is that right?
That's what they call themselves.
All right.
She travels the world. She is an official storyteller for the region. She's registered she works with the Irish consulate all over the place. And I've worked with her for many years, but I met her in Marrakesh face to face at every other year, there's an international storytelling festival, and we were both invited. And it launched a real wonderful working relationship.
That's so cool. Yeah. So a storytelling festival in Marrakesh. Wow.
In Marrakesh. Marrakesh used to be, in that region, the one place where all the storytellers went to. There's a huge square, I forget how many acres it is, called Jama El Fana. And it's where the storytellers would come to. And that's where you went to hear really stories that took days to tell.
Oh, my goodness.
And it died out in the 1970s with the advent of television.
Hey, television.
And so it was about 6 years ago now that some local folks said it's time to revive it. And now every other year they have a festival. We had 100 storytellers from around the world, speaking almost 30 languages. And we set the Guinness World Record for the longest continuous oral storytelling. So quite a feat.
Well, I think, how long was it?
Well, they only allowed, 82 hours. They had some pretty strict rules, but we were telling for a week straight. There was always 24 hours a day. There was storytelling going on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to break that record. We're just doing Friday, Saturday, Sunday in October. So tell us about you. Thank you for letting me know about Maria, but tell us about you. What's your background in storytelling? So you're a transformational storyteller. What's that mean?
What's that mean? Yeah. So I started my career, which really I didn't think of it as storytelling at the time, but it was, as a family therapist.
Okay.
And I got some pretty wonderful training there. I got trained in a technique that we both are, I don't know if it's a technique, it's a worldview. Ericksonian hypnosis was part of my training. I did that for about a decade. And I realized that what I was doing was listening to the stories of the family and giving them the opportunity to retell the story in a different way. I didn't have the answers, but I could ask them questions and lead them along in ways that would let them discover new ways of being. And that really got me started. So I took a couple other careers along the way. I got involved, if you can believe it, in the 1980s in artificial intelligence. I wrote some of the original texts on that topic.
Yeah, really? Wow. What did it entail back then? It was like
it was a whole collection of things that we take for granted now, like machine translation and machine vision and all these things that were just unthought of at that time. I had a company that built chips, specialized chips for AI. Who knew?
Wow.
And that took itself along for quite a while. But then I said, I want to do something more than just work with machines. I'd like to work with people again. And I went into the healthcare industry on the computerized side of it and spent a couple decades at that. So that was one whole path. And along that path, it was always storytelling. When I was doing the AI, my specialty was understanding how experts think. Well, what is that? That's getting them to tell you their story and telling it, retelling it to someone else.
Right.
When I was doing the healthcare for about 10 years, I was reading federal regulations on how to improve healthcare and translating them into things that computer scientists and marketing people and physicians could understand. So once again, telling stories. About 20 years ago, I decided I needed to feed the spiritual side of myself, which I was doing on my own, but I wanted to do it more formally. And I went off and got trained and ordained as a Jewish storyteller. And that's the word transformational storyteller is kind of my translation of the word magid, which means that, a transformational storyteller.
Okay.
And I was the school that I went to, when the fellow who was running that school could no longer run it, he gave it to me. And so I've been running that school now for 7, 8, 9 years. But I don't just train Jewish folks. I train people, as we kind of said in the opening, from around the world, from stories from around the world. And the one thread that goes through all of that is that you never know what a story is going to mean to someone else. You can know what it means to you, and it will change every time you tell it. But you tell it with an open heart. You tell it as authentically as you can, and then you trust that people will hear in that story what they need to hear and take whatever steps they need to take. So that's what I do.
Cool. So what happens if you're trying to make a certain point in a storytelling situation and they take away the wrong point?
That's a great question because it's based on a false assumption. And the false assumption is that I have a point to make. Right. And I don't. Beyond saying, we're all wonderful human beings and we should find a way to communicate with each other and have some fundamentals in there. But I'm not going to sermonize. I'm not going to proselytize or to promote a particular solution to something.
You're ordained. You're ordained as a Jewish story.
And that's the point. That's the wonderful thing about it is, there's an old joke that is more, as jokes are, is more truth than anything else. And that is, for every 2 Jews, you've got 3 opinions. And that's the nature of it. It is not to provide answers. It's to provide provocative questions. And that's what I do. So when I need to be persuasive, I can be persuasive. I can use those skills. But I'm not being a transformational storyteller in those moments. That's not the role.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's interesting. One of the people who studied with Erickson directly and then wrote books about it, and I have read his books. So I never met Erickson, but I've met a lot of his, first generation Ericksonian.
Yes.
So Jay Haley.
Oh, yeah.
Is said that he thinks one of the strengths of Erickson, but also one of the perhaps challenges with Erickson was that he told so many stories and he didn't ever really say, this is, step A.
And from this we learn.
Right.
Yeah.
He never did that.
No.
You just tell the stories and let people come up with their own interpretations of it.
Sure.
Which was great, but if you want to say this is Ericksonian hypnosis or this isn't Ericksonian hypnosis, we don't really know.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and Jay Haley was one of the great leaders in family therapy, and in fact, of the school of family therapy that I practiced. So,
no kidding.
Yeah. So I never met him. I met second order folks, but my teacher was someone who worked with him directly, so that kind of thing. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. And you're also a death doula.
I'm also a death doula, which might sound odd. And a lot of people, we used to call it an end of life doula, and that just seemed a little too polite.
Too polite.
Well, and a lot of people say it's not the end of life, it's just the end of my physical life. Okay, so we won't get into that argument. You're dying. We'd agree on that. And a death doula is kind of another amorphous term. People do all sorts of different service as a death doula. What I do is work with the person and their family or caregivers before, during, and afterwards. So I do a lot of grief work. I do a lot of trauma work. I do a lot of preparatory grief or anticipatory grief. And I use stories. I got a book of stories for end of life that, again, don't provide a particular answer, but open up the field for at least an exploration of it, whether it's internal or with a friend or family or whatever. It opens the door rather than provides the conclusion.
So when you say you have a book, you wrote the book.
I wrote the book. It's called Stories for the Heart. I wrote it with a colleague in Spain. She and I have never met. I hope to meet her.
Oh, really? Is that right?
This year. Yeah. Wow. She talk about, this is kind of the joy of my world. So she is a Belgian British woman who spent most of her time in India and currently lives in the south of Spain. All right. And she tells stories from around the world. And, I tell stories from around the world. And we decided we would teach a course on how to use stories for end of life. And that went so well. We ran it for 2 years. We said, well, these are great stories. Let's put them in a book. So we did something that was kind of difficult, which was we didn't want to write them as literary artifacts because we're storytellers, not story readers.
Yeah.
And so to write in the style that makes you think you're listening to it rather than seeing it was a challenge, but one I think we met. So.
Well, that's very cool. I look forward to reading that book. Will you be bringing some of them to Woodstock?
Oh, absolutely.
Good.
No, I think the correct grammar for that is they will be bringing me. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
I look forward to meeting them. Yeah, that's really interesting because, there is a difference. There's a big difference, obviously, between, telling a story and writing a story. And it goes the other way as well. When I did my first book, The User's Guide to Sleight of Mouth, I taught the seminar 100 times. And I'd recorded it 95 times and recorded the seminars. And I just thought, this is going to be great. I'll take a transcript of the seminar. I'm so good, such a good teacher. It'll be great. But it was horrible.
And boy, did it fail.
And so then I went into a studio and recorded it, just me talking to the studio, just, instead of teaching a seminar with questions and answers and whatever, just me talking to the thing, I said, okay, well, now I've got a book. So this will be good. But no, even that was like when it was transcribed and I was reading, it was like, this doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
It's just terrible.
Yeah.
We talk different than
we do. And part of the challenge I have in the storytelling that I teach is I'm trying to teach people the fluidity of storytelling, not the, here are the marks you need to hit along the way. And I've been asked to do that as, a what they call an asynchronous course, something you just put up on the screen and watch. I can't do it. I mean, I need the interaction with someone to say, okay, now you try this. Oh, what happened over there? Let's look at that. And that's where the learning takes place, not in the words I choose to open the session with.
All right.
Yeah.
So do you have a pretty clear idea what story you're going to be telling at the Woodstock Storytelling?
Well, as any transformational storyteller will say, to answer that question is yes, and that doesn't mean anything because it'll change the minute I walk on the stage. So, I have ideas about what I'd like to bring. I know what sorts of stories I want to bring. The theme being not explicitly, but implicitly stories for healing and transformation. That's kind of the body of my work. But what I'm really interested in, I'm going to be doing 2 sessions, one with Maria.
One with Maria, yes.
And that one, we're going to be bringing stories of strong women, which is not just a story of a hero who happens to be a female, but something different and challenging about the protagonist, where they're not just defeating a monster, but where they're actually eliciting a transformation. And those are different stories. And there tend to be much older stories. There's not many being created like that I've seen. There's a kind of a format to many traditional stories, which is, you have a monster and the protagonist overcomes it and everything's fine in the end. I'm much more interested, and this will be my second session, is on what I like to call healing monsters, pun intended. So are we healing the monster, or is the monster healing us? And the answer is yes. And those are the stories that draw me in a lot.
They were healing monsters.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful thing. I'm sure you've seen the the conversation that Joseph Campbell had with
Bill Moyers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Bill Moyers tells the story about being at a conference where they were talking about various things, and then they went to see, for some reason, a movie. And there were these like Tibetan monks that were there, and they went to see this movie, and they chose, of all things, like the oh God, what's it called? Not Amityville Horror, but the
a horror film.
A horror film where there's a devil.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yes. Rosemary's Baby.
Rosemary's Baby. I think that's right. But she's like her head spins around.
Yes.
And she's and it's this horrible thing. And they said, "Oh, I'm so sorry I brought you this. It was what a mistake. I don't know what you're thinking." He said, "Yeah, but I feel so sorry for that monster. Why were they treating him so badly?"
Yeah.
Because he had a very different take on what monsters do. Monsters
Sure.
are healing monsters, and there's a reason for them. They're an interesting archetype. Yeah.
Well, and there's another twist on that I've gotten very much involved with, because again, I look for stories that are not familiar. I'm just starting up a 8-week seminar on a very old Chinese story called Madam Whitesnake. And this is a story that has been around for, 1,500 years at least. And it changes as each dynasty in China comes along. So it's an interesting marker of Chinese culture. But in its original version, it's a story about a demon who runs around terrorizing villages and eating all the men. It's a monster story.
Mm.
And by the time you reach present day, it's a story about a dragon, not a demon, and one who falls in love with a man and the sacrifices she has to make in order to let her love continue. And you say, how did we get from point A to point B in these stories? But that's what happens when we start to look at monsters as being something other than just, the thing to be wiped off the story. What did Hitchcock call it? The MacGuffin, just they're actually a character. And so if we want to understand them, we're going to have to get to empathize with them at least.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, in Jungian psychology, the idea that, when we split off from our shadow side, we often project that out to the outside, and we see that as a monstrous being out there. We have dreams about, being chased by monsters, but it's actually part of ourselves that we need to be able to integrate.
That's right.
From the
That's
whole.
right.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Indeed. So you're just going like with a bunch of stories, and you're going to see what happens when you get there?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'll have narrowed them down. Somebody asked me once how many stories I know, and I can't answer that. But how many stories do I know well enough to tell at the drop of a hat? I don't know, about 100, something like that.
When you say stories in that context, how long are those 100 stories?
Well, some of them are only a few minutes long. Some of them will run for a good hour or two.
Really?
And so I walk around with them all the time. And I've had occasions where I was telling this one story, again, one of my favorites. And in this story, it turns out to be a ghost story, but you don't know that when the story is starting out. In the final scene, the protagonist says to this fellow who's just appeared in the story and didn't know him before at all, he offers him some help. And the fellow says, what took you so long to help me? And the protagonist says, well, your sister asked me to help you, and I just saw her yesterday, so couldn't get here any sooner. And the fellow says, well, now I know you're lying because my sister died 10 years ago. So there's the ghost story.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm telling this story. And, when you tell a story, you inhabit the story, you become the character. So speaking for this fellow who's receiving the gift of his dead sister. And the protagonist says, well, I'm bringing you this gift from your sister. And me now, as the fellow says, why in the hell would she want to bring me anything? And I thought, who said that? What does this mean? And that's what happens. You never know where these stories are going to take you. So,
wow.
Yeah. So would you like a story?
I would love a story.
Yeah. Let's see.
You got one?
I got one or two. I'm just thinking, I'd like to tell you one that's a little challenging. So I'll do that.
All right, cool.
And not all of my stories are Jewish, but this one's a Jewish story. And there was this fellow, let's call him Yitzhak. And Yitzhak lived in a poor shtetl. That means he had no money. The people around him had no money. It was a hard life. He had no family. And it was just tough for him to get by from day to day. And he couldn't hold down a job, and he didn't have what it took to beg. So he thought, well, I'll go off and I'll rob people, and I'll get some money that way. Well, he was about the most incompetent thief you could ever hope to have. So he would try and rob somebody, and they would fight him off, and they would beat him up. And he kept trying and trying, but he just couldn't get the hang of it. And so he sat and he thought about it, and he said, well, the problem is I'm only one person, and it's one-on-one. I'll get a band with me, and we'll go off together, and we'll beat people up together, and that way we'll get money. And so he got 3 or 4 other guys who were equally incompetent, and they would go off and try and rob people, and the whole group of them would get beaten up. I mean, it was just a miserable failure. In fact, they got to be so well known as the incompetent thieves that whenever they were walking down the street, people would race over to them and beat them up. So it was really terrible. Well, Yitzhak is thinking about it, and he says, the problem here is, first of all, everybody knows us. Second of all, nobody's got any money here anyway. But if we want to find money, where do we go? We go to the highways, what they call it, between the villages. And there'll be these carriages going up and down the highway, and there'll be rich people in them, and we'll rob the carriages. And there's where the money is. So they went off and they hid by the side of the road, and this, wonderful carriage comes by, and, they never stopped to think that a carriage with a wealthy occupant would have guards. And so they leapt out to attack this carriage, and they almost were all killed. I mean, it was miserable. They managed to crawl away alive, but not much more. And the rest of the men were fed up and said, this is just not worth it. But Yitzhak said, wait a minute, I noticed that up and down this highway, there are also these wagons that go back and forth. And in the back of the wagon will be a rabbi. And following the wagon will be a bunch of his disciples. And whenever they get to a village, the people come out, and they're so happy to have a rabbi come that they'll give him food and clothes and sometimes a place to stay. And all he has to do is to answer a few questions or maybe make a blessing, and that's all it takes. He said, I could do that. I'll be the rabbi. You be my disciples, and we'll make it happen. And one of the fellows says, but Yitzhak, you don't know any answers. You don't know any blessings. How's that going to work? And Yitzhak says, that's why you're a failure. If they knew the answers, they wouldn't be asking me. I can make anything up and they'll believe it. So they said, okay, give it a try. They found an old wagon and this poor mule, and they found him a cloak to wear, and they made it to the next town. And sure enough, just like he said, people came out, and they didn't even ask any questions. They started throwing food at him and offering him all sorts of stuff. And the mayor came out. The mayor came out and said, I haven't seen you here before. You must be a well-traveled rabbi. Would you do me the honor of coming and staying with me? We'll put you up. We'll give you separate bedrooms. You can have a bath. We'll feed you tonight. And all I'll ask is that you make a blessing. And Yitzhak says, sure. And they head off to his mansion, and the guys are like, you did it. This worked. And they get showed up to their rooms, and they can smell the food being cooked down below. They're taking the first baths they probably had in their life. It's wonderful. They come down for dinner, and the mayor has invited everybody there. It's a big ballroom, and they're sitting at the head table. He's sitting next to the mayor, and they're drinking. Everything is wonderful. Until finally the mayor kind of nudges Yitzhak and says, Rabbi, would you bless my daughter now? And Yitzhak says, sure, bring her down. I'll give her a blessing. And the mayor says, well, she's not well enough to come downstairs. And Yitzhak says, she's not well enough? He says, no. In fact, Rabbi, she's likely to die tonight if she doesn't get the right blessing. So please come up and give her a blessing. Well, Yitzhak's heart is going like this. And they walk up these stairs, and he's followed by his men. And they get to the top of the stairs, and there's this door. And they open the door, and it's just a tiny little room with one candle burning in this bed. And this 10-year-old girl laying on the bed, and she is not well. Mayor takes Yitzhak and he pushes him in the room and he closes the door. And everything goes quiet. And a little while later, people start to hear some weeping. They can't quite make out who it is, but it gets a little louder and they realize it's Yitzhak. And his weeping turns to crying, turns to wailing, and everybody is sure she's died. And sure enough, the door is flung open. He comes racing out, tears streaming down his face. He runs down the stairs and out the door. And right behind him walks the little girl. She's cured. She leaps into her father's arms. Oh, it's wonderful. The men are totally confused. They go running down outside, and there's Yitzhak just prone beneath a tree, wailing and weeping. And they say, Yitzhak, Yitzhak, where did you learn to make a prayer like that? He said, prayer? I don't know any prayers. Well, you must have done something. She's cured. And he said, I didn't make any prayers. All I did was I said, what kind of a God are you that you would put the life of a little girl into the hands of a thief?
Nice. Ah. So we're not supposed to have too much dead air on a podcast. But, yeah.
Understood. Yeah.
But, goodness gracious, what a story. So how do you go? You said you like to try to find stories that no one knows or whatever.
Right.
How do you do that? How do you find a story?
Well, a couple of different ways. One is by having a wonderful community of storytellers from around the world. And so we are always working together to seek out these diamonds in the rough. So I've got a storyteller friend in Estonia who will say, hey, I think you probably haven't heard one. I got another one in Iceland. So these stories start to accumulate. I also do, there are some wonderful catalogs of stories from around the world.
Sure.
So I look into them, and I look into difficult themes. So I don't want just a simple theme, but I want a difficult theme or a complicated theme. And so I'll track them down. Again, one of the benefits of the pandemic is that, we're all connected on the internet now. So I get work with storytellers live, remote, but live.
Right.
And so we do that kind of stuff. And the last way is, the courses I teach, which are seminars. So they're not lectures. And I'll be like the one I told you, the Madam Whitesnake. I've given my students probably half a dozen different versions of the story, but I'll say part of your challenge in coming to this class is to find some more versions of it, and to go off and find maybe a variation of it that reminds you of it. It isn't directly the same story, but it's got a theme that you think is related. Bring it to the class, and we all study together. So it's a real collaboration of work.
That's amazing.
The other part of that, though, is once you've got the bones of a story, or however much of it you've got, then you start to mine it. And there will be lots of stuff that you don't recognize in the story the first time you read it or hear it or see it. And so staying with it and working with it over and over and saying, well, what's going on here? And how is this affecting me? And why is that me, or is that the story, or what's going on? So there's a lot of work that's involved in kind of digging into these stories. Yeah.
All right. So what did they teach you when you were trained?
Well, this, a lot of it, some of it was performative stuff. So, how do you modulate your voice and all the acting skills, I would call, not to diminish them, but but to say there's one part of it that is basically freeing you up to tell with more than just your lips.
Mhm.
Another is the tools for looking at stories. And a third was just having the wealth of stories, because this particular school had amazing repertoire. They're all Jewish, but they're just amazing repertoire of stories to work with. And the last was the community. Again, we would be working together. We met every week for 2 years. It was, a fairly intense effort. So a lot of work, but some structure to it, absolutely. But the answer was not in the structure. The structure was just the container that let you look for what was going on inside
Inside.
the story, inside you.
Mhm.
One of the things that kind of harkens back to my first career is that as a therapist, one of the things you're taught, and rightly so, is that you should always be getting supervision. You should always be working with somebody so that enabling you to work on yourself,
Mm.
because you're going to bring your own issues to whatever it is you're doing. And if you're not aware of them, they'll bite you in the behind. And so I've carried that through with my storytelling. I'm working with two people all the time about what am I working on? How is this affecting me? What bias might I be bringing into this? What new things should I be trying? And that's all personal work, because I got to be a clear vessel for this kind of stuff to happen.
That's really, really interesting. As a storyteller, as a hypnotherapist myself, as a coach myself, I tell stories all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really interesting, because I don't know about half the time, I don't know what percentage it is, but a lot of the times my stories are about me, about my life, something I learned in life. So they're, true stories.
Mm-hmm.
They're always from a perspective. They're not necessarily, true
Mm-hmm.
police blotter
Right.
perspective or whatever, but they're, I'm not making it up. It's a true thing.
Right.
And they're a lesson. And a lot of times there's stories that, maybe I'll tell the story you just told someday,
Mm-hmm.
When it seems appropriate, but they just kind of pop in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily plan anything,
Right.
but it's like, oh, that reminds me of, a story. And that,
Mm-hmm.
just like that story with Gregory Bateson, right?
Absolutely. Well, and my favorite. So I get this question a lot. Is that a true story? My answer is something along the lines of, every story I tell is true. Some are factual. And that's the case. And some of them are partially factual, but I'm not worried about whether it's factual or not, because I don't pretend to say everything I'm going to tell you is factual. I am going to say everything I tell you is true. So
Cool.
Yeah.
No, I get that. I mean, I told the story. It might be repeating on the same podcast, but one of my teachers, Dave Dobson, said that he was teaching a seminar once or participating in a seminar once where Richard Bandler was present.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave was talking about his experiences working in hospitals as a doctor. He's not a medical doctor, PhD, but he was working with burn patients and stuff in this hospital. And he was telling these stories. And then like the next day or soon thereafter, Richard was telling the same stories as if he had done them.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Dave was none too pleased with his being told. And he said, "God damn it, Richard, if you want some experience, go get some."
Well, there's a parallel problem amongst professional storytellers. Is who owns the story?
Yeah.
And and that's a serious and important question.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's an answer that has to do with copyright. Sometimes it's more often or almost always has to do with what's your source, and is this something that is a personal story for them? Do you have permission to tell it?
Right.
And then there's the cultural thing that some cultures have stories that they don't want retold. And so navigating that is always important. There's one thing I didn't do when I told my story, which is to tell you where I heard it from. And that was normally be something I do. And I would tell you, I heard this from my teacher who taught it to me. And so I don't have a written source for it, although I've found written sources. This is not something he made up, but he told it in his own way. And now I tell it in my own way. And that's part of the lineage of the story. And those are important to share especially when they're relevant. Yeah.
Especially when they're relevant.
Yeah. So if I tell you a Grimm story, you'll recognize it, and I won't have to tell you it's a Grimm story, but that sort of thing.
Yeah. And yet they didn't make up their stories half the time either.
They didn't make up any of them. In fact, they had women go out and hear the stories and come back and bring them, and then they rewrote them. So
or wrote them at all because they were of an oral lineage, and then they just had written them down up to that.
No, the Grimms wrote them. Yeah, it wasn't. They heard them from their women investigators, and then they wrote them down.
And then they wrote them down. So now they're Grimms.
Now they're Grimms. That's right. Yeah.
Something to be said for that, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool, Jim. This is really amazing. Really beautiful. So you're doing something with Mary. Is that also unplanned, or do you have a plan?
Maria, well, we have the topic, so it's strong women. And I think I know she's got a couple of different stories she's thinking of. I'm probably going to do one that's called Tatterhood. That's what I'm thinking of. And that will leave us time. We're both the sorts of storytellers that like to have white space. So there will be some time for audience participation and reaction to it. And mine will be similar in the sense of looking at healing monsters. So, taking time to tell the story, leave space for reaction and discovery after it, each story. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. And if people want to get hold of you, how do they do that?
So if they want to find me, transformationalstorytelling.org is my business website. Jim Brulé at gmail.com. Not hard to find is my email. And I'm involved in a lot of other things, but those are probably the two best ways to track me down.
Cool. Well, you'll certainly put those in the program notes down below. And we will all of us be gathered together at the Woodstock Storytelling Festival.
Only less than 2 months away.
I know.
Exciting.
Do you know the website for that?
It's Woodstock Story Festival.
WoodstockStoryFestival.org.
Yeah. I think so. Well, let me just check.
.com.
Well, no, it's .com. Sorry, .com.
Okay. Woodstock. Yeah, and tickets are on sale.
Tickets are on sale. Absolutely.
I think we've actually sold one already. Actually,
there's a few been sold, but it's early days yet. So.
It's early days yet. Not necessarily when this broadcast.
Yeah, who knows by the time this comes out?
Tomorrow, get him quick.
That's right. But just to kind of plug it a tiny bit more, it's 3 days long, 2.5 days and a full day, and in the Woodstock, which is always kind of nice to mention. Not the farm though.
No, the Jim Brulé at the Woodstock.
Yeah,
exactly, and it's going to be amazing. And what's interesting is that it's very varied as far as the stylistic approaches of storytelling. I mean, the people there's a lot of different people. There's poetry, there's music, there's all sorts of stuff coming. Yeah. I'm gonna be doing a little playing back there. You see my piano back there?
Yeah.
Doing a little playing. It's part of my story, actually. I'm gonna play and
good.
Little Victor Borga routine.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that or Tom Lehrer, right?
Right. Yeah, Tom Lehrer. That's good. Poisoning pigeons and good stuff. All right, well, let's get out of here. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you real soon.
Thanks.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week. when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.